Good morning. Thank you all for your patience. I appreciate it. We had some difficulties with the train system coming out of New York, so we welcome all questions about mass transit. My name is Ben Dworkin. I am the director of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics. On behalf of Rider University and the Rebovich Institute, I want to thank all of you for coming to be a part of this unique and special program. Before I introduce our guests of honor, let me just explain what's going to happen. First, we're going to ask everyone, please turn off your cell phones. We want to try and avoid any kind of needless interruptions. Second of all, please note that today's program is on the record. It's being recorded by both Rider University and Cablevision, where it will be seen sometime in the future. It's going to be on our website, so please be aware of that. Third, as you saw when you came in, copies of the governor's book are here and can be purchased in the lobby. Following the joint program, you can get it autographed, copy upstairs in the fireside lounge. Just follow the signs as you leave the auditorium. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to the governors, and then they will begin their conversation. We'll give about 25 minutes. We're running behind. About 25 minutes or so, I will come back up here to indicate that we'll have about 15 minutes to do a Q&A. We have several wireless microphones held by volunteers who will pass one to you if I select you. Please wait until you actually have the microphone before you ask your question. I also ask that you make your question as succinct as possible, just so that we can get through as many as possible. That having been said, as a public event here at Rider University, the first 3 questions are going to be asked by Rider students. So everybody else, you're going to have to wait and see if we have time after that. The Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics is committed to, in part, raising the level of political discourse in our nation. This means that we continue to bring in an array of political leaders and elected officials and public servants to talk about the challenges facing our communities, our states, and our nation. Today's event builds on this strong legacy. Each of our guests today is a star in his own right. They are leaders in their states and in the nation. When each of these men speaks, people pay attention. And rightfully so, for the future of the Republican Party, as well as our nation, is being impacted by the leadership of these 2 gentlemen. We would be honored to have just either of them here on stage, but together, they are the dynamic duo. We are really something special.
Makes me Batman over here.
That's it. In an era of dysfunctional Washington, D.C., the laboratories for the future of government continue to be in the states. It is in the states where we see the cutting edge of public policy being made. And each of these men is at the forefront of pushing that agenda. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, from the great state of Indiana, Governor Mitch Daniels; from the great state of New Jersey, Governor Christie. Gentlemen.
Well, Ben, thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here. You know, as a guy who just got elected in 2009 and came in as one of the rookie governors, and Daniels was one of the senior statesmen. The fact that I now get to ask him questions is great. It's just great. We've done a lot of this privately over time, and he's given me a lot of tutorials over my 20 months as governor, so now we get to do some of it publicly. Welcome to New Jersey.
I'm glad to be back on this campus. You know, last time I was here, I was attending a then all-male school nearby and trying to get lucky. I'm hoping today works out a little better.
Why don't you tell him? We'll do the best we can for you. This is Jersey, after all.
Yeah.
So we'll. Why don't you just tell them a little bit about your New Jersey background, because you do have some.
Well, I went to school here for 4 years. That left an indelible mark on me. I come back now and then and reunite with my ne'er-do-well classmates. But you know, back then you could hitchhike. I saw an awful lot of New Jersey from its highways. It was right before the hitchhiking era closed, I guess, in America. And I got around it on the cheap a lot of times.
Speaking on the cheap, Talk, I think, first about, you're obviously you're known in Indiana for what you did in terms of taking over the state in some real difficult financial circumstances, and how you dealt with it both in ways where you reduced government and innovative ways to try to fund things. So I think talk to folks a little bit about what you found when you became governor,
Yeah.
and then how you kind of proceeded from there, what your philosophy was, how you approached it.
First, I'll say that although we found the challenge a pretty large one, I don't think it rivaled the one you found here. And just at least from everything I've been able to hear and read, it made me count our blessings that our issues weren't any bigger than they were. But they were big. It was interesting. Indiana was out of cycle. We came in 2005, and the bubble was inflated, and the economy was doing well, and most states were doing all right. We were broke. It didn't take a lot of magic. We brought the level of state spending growth down to, compounded over 7 years, around 1%, so maybe a third of inflation. And for the first few years, revenues caught up. People ask, how'd you do it? I always say something wise, like, flip like, we spent less money than we took in. Write that down. I guess the thing that I would say, Chris, is that the reason I think we've been able to sustain a position of fiscal solvency even in a really severe downturn, we got hit as hard as anybody at the revenue line, is that I think it's fair to say we built a culture of performance in Indiana state government, starting right away. We pay people for their performance. The best performers in state government some of them had double-digit pay increases year on year. The other end of the bell curve, people get no raise, but a chance to do better, one chance to do better. We measure everything. And I guess the larger point I want to make is that our approach has been to say, look, we should never take a dollar from a free citizen without a really necessary purpose. And there were a number of things we decided these things are not necessary. But there are many, many imperative roles government should have. And so within that, we may draw a slightly smaller circle than some would of the things you ought to do. But in that circle, we work really, really hard to deliver effective government. Not just because it's an equally important obligation, give people good service for the money you do take. But another point it's on my mind more and more these days is that we want the people of our state to have confidence in government. Skepticism about big governments is American as the coney dog. Yeah. But folks, and a lot of folks agree with you and me about basic things. I think let that skepticism migrate into contempt for all government. And I don't think that's a good thing in our democracy, and it's sure not a good thing when we're facing huge problems that effective government alone can solve.
Well, it's interesting. We just went through, as you know, a big round of pension and health benefit reforms for our public sector. And you had gone through that already on the health benefit side in particular in Indiana. And I always thought it was interesting. We've talked about this before, but I think it's interesting for this audience to hear because we're just at the beginning of this process. Right. Can you talk a little bit about the way you changed the provision of health insurance and health care for your public employees and how they responded to it and what the effect has been? Because I think it's an interesting story.
Yes, when I first arrived, some nice person came in and said, hey, you have to sign up for the benefits in health. And I said, okay, is there an HSA or something like it? And they said, no. I said, well, when can we fix that? And they said, the end of the year for next year. I said, well, let's put one on the menu. We did, and to go to the end of the tape, we now have 86% of Indiana's state employees, I should say remaining state employees. We have fewer state employees than Indiana had in 1976. But those who remain are doing a great job. And 86% of them have what's called a consumer-driven account. I guess everybody knows what I'm talking about. But in one of these arrangements, the employee contributes, the employer, that's the state, contributes, and that's their money. And they decide and pay cash as long as there's money in that account. Anything left at the end of the year rolls over. There's $50 million in these accounts, last I checked. That's the property of the person. Then they're covered in true insurance fashion on the back end. Well, guess what? People are not too gullible, too incompetent to make healthcare decisions for themselves. And now we've got a body of evidence that shows that with huge deltas. They are more likely to ask for generic drugs. They're more likely to ask for second opinions. They're less likely to go to the emergency room. They shop around if there's a procedure that they do have to have. And we are saving double digits. The last actuarial report was 11 or 12%, everything normalized, below what you would get in a traditional plan. And so we think that's, I always say we'll never have cost control in healthcare till we're all cost controllers. You know, when government's trying to squeeze it here and squeeze it there, you know, the balloon pops out somewhere else. And the last thing I want to say, Chris, as I think you know, is we applied this same principle to a program for the low-income uninsured. And so these are people just above the Medicaid line who are not eligible for Medicaid. And guess what? They're showing a lot of savvy, too. And they're making the same consumerist decisions because it doesn't feel like it's free. It doesn't feel like somebody else is picking up the tab. Yeah. You know, we're kind of, for the scholars in the room, we're kind of the only test bed out there. It turns out that the average penetration of consumerist plans in public sector America is 2. I said, well, heck, we got to be 0.5 of the 2. But why? Because the unions hate them. You know, they want to stand between that poor worker and the system. But our folks have proven in those 2 populations, you know, Americans are up to this. We got to give them a little more credit.
And the thing I thought was fascinating was that it's free choice for these folks, and 86% of them choose to go into these health savings accounts rather than the traditional insurance plans.
It's a lot better deal because it's costing less. We've been able to charge less for it, and it's very much in our interest as the employer to incentivize, and we have these plans. We're charging more like the real cost of the very expensive plan. And our folks believe we'll be over 90% when the upcoming enrollment period's over.
Amazing. To take you back to a different time in your career and how it affected your conduct as governor, you had stints in 2 different White Houses, I think, or was it 3?
2.
2, I thought. It was the Reagan White House, right? And then
2. There's 1 too many, but 2. Yeah.
And then as OMB director for George W. Bush. I mean, how did those experiences in Washington then affect your approach as governor of Indiana when you left there to become governor?
Less than some people suspect. It may have helped fortify a conviction I think I already had that government's a pretty klutzy mechanism, and you ought to be very modest and humble about assuming it can do anything well. No, if you'll permit me, Chris, I'll say as I've often said in the past, because a lot of people assume, they kind of look at this rather, strange list of things I've been involved in, they center in on those.
Yep.
But by a huge margin, when I'm asked what job that you've had helped you be in your current role most, it's the years I spent in business, no question. How to make ends meet, especially when things are tough. How to find ways, how to identify those things that separate the must-do from the nice-to-do items. How to get large numbers of people headed in the same direction. As I was talking about earlier, you and I can make the smartest decisions we know how and maybe get the legislature to help on here or there. But if you really want government to become leaner and more effective, you got to get everybody, as many people as possible in the act. So when something seems to go well and I think, well, how do I know that? It's almost always from running a modest-sized business or being part of a big corporation.
Now we look at what's going on in Washington, and you alluded to this. Ben alluded to it in his introduction. How do you view the current atmosphere and climate in Washington, and what's your view from Indianapolis about what should be being done there to try to make things a little different?
Well, not too pretty. But because optimism is the only operating assumption I know that makes any sense, I look I'll answer your question, and I try to write this book with a positive outlook. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that the results we need, the young people here and on this campus and all their counterparts elsewhere, are going to get a serious hosing, along with the rest of us, by the way, if we don't get serious about the debts we've piled up as a country. That is not an ideological statement. It's an arithmetic one. And I think progress toward that has not, let's just say, has not been helped by the currency of debate in Washington. I wrote chapter about this. I can identify some positive things. They're talking about the right subjects now. You've had the Bowles-Simpson Commission. The president ignored it, but it advanced the discussion. And but boy, progress has been so halting and so slow. You've proved in New Jersey, and we've tried to. I think we've got some evidence in Indiana. Boy, if you got a big problem, get after it. Yeah? There's a country and western song I always liked called "If I'd shot you when I should have, I'd be out of jail by now." Like pull the trigger, so. I hope I'm wrong, but there are people more knowledgeable than I that agree that the arithmetic of our national situation, let's don't worry about whose fault it was. Everybody had a hand for a long, long time. The question ought to be, as it always is, what do we do now? And I do think that all the sort of soundbite, so's your old man stuff is slowing that down. This is so important, I'm going to take one more second.
Yeah.
People ask about the presidential race and so forth. I'll tell you something's troubling me a little bit lately. I think the president's in really bad shape. I think the failures of his policies and maybe other factors, will mean he'll have a difficult time getting reelected from what I can see right now. What troubles me about it is it could lead, if that doesn't change, it could lead whoever gets nominated on our side to want to play it safe.
Yep.
I'll be the default option. Vote for me, I'm not him. Well, I do think we need a change in national leadership. But if you think that we face a survival level issue as a country and that we need big change now, we found, I know you found, big change requires big majorities. You've got to try to get together people who might agree on, even if it's just one thing, they may disagree about everything else. Okay, fine. But I hope our nominee, and there's lots of time for this, will have a little more confidence in American people. Step out and not only identify the problems, say, look, here's my best cut at how we solve them. By the way, if you've got a better alternative that really will work, let's hear it. But, don't let me, unless you really are prepared to see something major change. And, I think it's the contention of this book, despite all the skeptics of the centuries and the present day, that we can do this.
The concern I have as well, I share what you have, is that we're not really talking about, on our side, any of the folks are at this point, those issues in a really forthright way. We're dancing on some other stuff around, and everyone's trying they get their 4 or 5 sound bites that they prep for before the debate, and we'll see that again tonight, I'm sure. But,
You'll see it.
Yeah.
I don't watch those things. Call me up and tell me what.
I watch it for you and Haley. I call you guys to let you know what they said. But it seems to me that we have a challenge as the folks who are not involved in it, to be kind of prodding people into talking about these things, because they're so important to the future of our states and what we're trying to do. And I wonder what you see as your role in the national discussion going forward. We know you're not going to be a candidate for president, but what do you see as your role going forward?
Well, we'll see. I wrote this little thing. I don't know if anybody's going to read it, but that was my whole thought. I'll tell you the true story. The idea of writing it, I took seriously starting 20-some months ago. And they said, you write up an outline, we'll give it to somebody, see if anybody's interested. I was very proud of the first line of the outline. It was, so many books are written because the author intends to run for president of the United States. This one's written specifically because I don't. But I'm concerned about the country, and let me tell you why. I thought, well, that's catchy. That's a grabber. They made me take that out from when they went to sell the book. But I didn't con anybody. I said, no, I don't think it's in the cards for me and for my family. But we all have an obligation to participate, and so that could be a part of it. And obviously, if there's something useful I can do to help our eventual nominee, I will sure be willing to do it.
Well, I'll ask you one other thing that's particular to both of our states, and then we'll open it up to let other people ask questions. There was an attempt here by my predecessor, as you probably know, to sell our toll roads, the Turnpike and the Parkway, and which turned out to be unsuccessful both in terms of achieving it and drastically unsuccessful politically for him, which is why I'm sitting here with you and not him, at least in part. But but I know you went through that in Indiana and found some very different results. And I wonder if you could just talk about that and what it's allowed you to be able to do in Indiana because of the way you handled it. And if you know a little bit about the differences between what happened here and in Indiana, you could probably talk about that too, I'm sure.
All right, well, let me try to be real concise, but it's a big story in the book, by the way. Let me start by saying this is one of those issues I've always thought, in my naivete, that folks across the spectrum could get together on. You know, we do need to rebuild the infrastructure of this country, the asphalt kind and the fiber and frequency kind, too, for that matter. And, you know, our predecessors in our party, the Whigs, Abraham Lincoln, so they really believed in internal improvements. It was why? Because this is something that, if government does it well, it enables the private sector to flourish. Yep. You can build your business on one of those new roads and be closer to your markets and so forth. So we have the same problem that almost every state I know of has. Huge shortfall between promises politicians had made. I'd go around the state when I was a no-name first-time candidate. People had these yellow pieces of paper. You know, the state commits to build Highway 69 and 40 years old. So anyway, we couldn't find any other way to raise the necessary money to close this gap or even approach it. I look around the world, I see this happening everywhere but the United States. We offered to see anybody want to lease and run our toll road effectively as a public utility, tightly regulated, by the way, a couple hundred pages, controlling everything from any growth in tolls to how long you have to get snow off the roads. And we got, our timing was fortunate. We moved fast, helped a lot. We hit the jackpot. I was telling Ben in the other room, if you valued that road in state hands, in political hands, patronage operation, I got to take this digression. I was traveling all over the state all the time. Again, nobody knew who I was, and I tried to do it with shoe leather. And we kept going through this last toll booth for Chicago. It was 15 cents, 1.5. You know, like, who's got a nickel, right? I mean, and I got elected. I thought, that's 15 cents. I said, what does it cost us to collect the toll? Well, it's government. They don't know. So I said, well, go figure it out. They come back in a couple weeks. They say, we think it's 34 cents. I said, that's a great business model. I said, but I got a better one. Close the toll booth, fire somebody's cousin who's sitting there, you know, and put out a cigar box. Right? We're 19 cents ahead, and occasionally somebody will chuck in a quarter just to be nice. So anyway, we got 3 times the. I said, value the road as though all future governors will be unlike all our predecessors. They will raise tolls with inflation, just to keep the thing going. It was losing money. And what's it worth? And the NPV of that was, you know, $1.3 billion or something like it. I said, you know, we're going to have to get a couple times that before I'm going to go through this. We got 3 times that. And the rest is history. We're building at record rates. Our construction budget in Indiana this year is 3 times the historic run rate. And it's a great time to be building stuff, by the way, because nobody else is, and we're getting great prices. So, long way of saying that it worked for us. May not work everywhere else. I remember talking to Governor Corzine briefly about it, and he was reluctant to go the full lease route, and I know he came up with something more complicated, which I don't recall the details of. I will just
Nobody else does either.
Okay, yeah. Well, you know, I'm sure you found the same thing. I've learned over time, simplicity really matters. When you try to do something big, when we went to do property tax reduction and so forth, we looked at a lot of things. I said, the problem with that's smart, but you're not going to be able to explain that to you know, to the guy in the diner. And so ours, it was controversial first, but I'll tell you the lessons that came out of it. One, again, back to trust and confidence. If you, at least the Americans that I'm employed by, 6.5 million of them, they will listen to a new idea. And we are not a state that's been known historically for change, quite the opposite. Yeah. But they're willing to listen to a new idea. And if you make an honest enough case, plain spoken case, a lot of them will support it. Some that don't, or don't get it the first time, they're open-minded enough, they see a result. Later on, they'll say, well, you know what? Maybe it's okay. And so I really hope that we'll start addressing as a nation Very real problem. Another one we ought to come together on. And part of the answer ought to be to do what the rest of the world's doing. Let private capital participate. The problem is, you go down to Washington, full of goodwill, and tell this story, and they, at least before, and they would look at you and go, no, 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 no. We want everybody to come here and kiss our ring for the money. We don't want those nasty private enterprises to have anything to do with it.
Well, I think we should allow it to get open up some questions from the audience.
That'd be good.
And for the governor, so.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, governors. All right. Well, we have, like I said, first few questions are going to come from Riders students. So let me turn to our front row. Michael Ward, you got a question. So if we can get our wireless mic to him.
Governor Christie, Governor Daniels, I first of all want to thank you for coming to Rider University and sharing a few moments with us. I'm a Rider freshman here, and the first part of my question is to you, Governor Christie. Prior to your victory of signing into law pension and benefit reform, many public sector unions in the state unleashed ad campaigns that left a sour taste in the mouths of many unionized public school employees. Governor Daniels, I'm sure you've met some of the same problems as well. Do both of you feel that you'll need to repair this relationship with teachers and their unions before continuing with comprehensive education reform?
Well, I mean, so for me, I'm willing to repair a relationship that's willing to be productive. I mean, I could go there and act, Listen, I could pretend as well as the next guy, so I could go there and pretend that everything's fine and we'll be nice to each other. But my position regarding the teachers union has been the same from the time I got into the race until today. That is, when they're ready to come forward and be participants in meaningful reform that will improve especially urban educational opportunities for our kids, then I'm willing to sit at the table with them anytime. They want to continue to pass on to me warmed over protections of a failed status quo, then they can continue to stand outside my office and look in the window. And that's my view. And I think that people should know what the status of the relationship is. I shouldn't pretend that it's okay if it's not. It's not. And if you think it is, then you don't watch TV because, they spent about $15 million over the last 20 months to let you all know that I don't belong in the governorship. I belong in jail or something. So, that's my view of it. But I'm sure Daniel's much more congenial on that than I am, maybe.
Yeah, I wouldn't say jail. Probation. No, I mean, one of the things that you all know this, but America loves your governor, and part of it is just because his sincere concern. If the issue is education, for instance, his first and last concern is children, and he doesn't let anything else get in the way. I'm for good relationships. I really am. I'm out always preaching. We've tried every way we can to, as I say, build big majorities. But if results is what you care about, that's what you do. But there has to be a two-way street. And we just passed the most sweeping set. We ran the table on education reform this year. But it could never, ever, ever have happened until the political equation changed. I tried everything in the world. Now, we did a lot. We did, as many things as we could to make the teachers, the individual teachers, a life and career better in our state. We've immunized them against lawsuits if they're keeping order in the classroom, and we have, as far as I'm concerned, the least fair system is all the one we had. The best teacher, no matter how effective, no matter how hardworking, got nothing any better than the worst. Now, people say. Annual evaluations and tenure based on student growth, not tenure based on living another year. Oh, it won't be perfectly fair. I say, no, it won't. Life isn't. But it'll be a lot more fair than what we were doing. And, I think the best teachers agree with that. And any day that our teachers' union wants to really jump in and get with programs like that, I'd love nothing more. But, we couldn't wait. America's waited way too long. We have handicapped a generation or two, at least in some sectors of America, for life. And the constant stalling tactics and rearguard actions, just can't wait.
Thank you. Next question, Charles Measley.
Governor Christie, Governor Daniels, my name is Charles Measley, and on behalf of the Rider College Republicans, I would like to welcome you both here today.
I was wondering why you're wearing a tie.
A red one, too.
Red tie.
I thought maybe you had to wear a tie to ask a question.
My question is directed to the both of you. With unemployment among college grads being the highest it has been in recent years, what state regulations need to be eliminated in order to spur job creation?
Well, I hope fewer than there were 6 years ago in our state. I don't know what Chris thinks. This is a very important question, and I think it's very much should be on our minds nationally right now. I mean, Charles, this enormous survival level issue I keep talking about of our debt can only be addressed if we have a period of rousing national growth. Again, it ought to be something everybody agrees on. Most important, of course, for the youngest people in our society and for the poorest. And a big part of that is to stop making it more expensive to hire people. And regulations do, almost always. Now, sometimes that is fully worth the price in the candle. But in the situation we're in now, I personally favor a moratorium, or at least one with a severe exceptions policy, on anything new for a while we try to create or help the market create more opportunities for the people you're asking about. You know, on my first day on the job, we tried to be real busy, and we were. But one of the things I did, I went and got in a room a lot bigger than this, all the employees of our environmental management agency, and there were a lot of them there. There are not as many today, but there were a lot of them there. And I said, listen, I want you to understand what we are and aren't about. We're not going to moderate or weaken one regulation. In 7 years, we haven't. You know, we're proud of the progress that's been achieved, and frankly, some folks on my side of the tracks ought to acknowledge that more often. However, we got an economic problem in this state. You know, and those folks out there you're regulating are not the enemy, they're your neighbors. And I want you to do three things, please. One, I want you to be quick. Time is money is not a figure of speech. We're going to measure how long it takes you to turn around an answer, turn around a permit, and we do. Two, I want you to be predictable. I keep bumping into these folks. Says Inspector A said one thing, I spent the money. Inspector B came around 6 months later, told me, no, do something different. You know, you're killing people, you're killing jobs when you do that. And I said, finally, I want you to be collaborative, not punitive. Your job is not to lurk around, you know, in the bushes waiting for somebody to screw up so you can come out and whack them. Your job is tell them what we expect. Tell them how to get to compliance. The few bad actors that don't, we'll throw the book at them. So that's our approach. And you know, people calculate. Here's one thing I did learn in that last job, you know. You can calculate with real precision the tax that a regulation imposes. It's quantifiable, and it's big. It's huge. A couple trillion a year in the country right now. And so sorry for the long answer, but it's a really important question. It's got to be part of the recovery, not just of our two states, but the nation.
I couldn't answer it any better than that. Go to the next question.
Okay, we got time for one last question, though. Jonathan Josephs.
Governor Christie, Governor Daniels, thank you both for being here today. I wanted to ask you, I understand this choice must have been both political and personal for both of you. Why have you guys chosen not to run for the 2012 presidential election?
Well, which one of us said no first? Who goes first?
Do it alphabetically.
Yeah, he went to Princeton.
Nothing wrong with that.
Listen, I think you're absolutely right in the premise of your question that it is a personal judgment at the end. You know, I'm sure both of us have had lots of political experts and interested parties and genuinely good Americans come to us and suggest that we should do this. But in the end, I said this to a number of folks who approached me. I said, you know, I appreciate all the wonderful things you're saying about me, but when I'm in a hotel room in Des Moines and it's 5:30 in the morning and it's 15 below and it's time for me to get up to go shake hands at the meatpacking plant. The only one that's going to be in bed with me is Mary Pat, not you. So I'm going to be out there on my own. And you all will be back here in New York or Washington or wherever you're from, warm in your bed, sleeping, while I'm out there doing that. So it's got to be something that you and your family really believes is not only the right thing to do, but I think what you must do at that time in your life, both for you and for your country. And for me, the answer to that was it isn't. And if you don't feel that deeply in your heart that it is, then you have no business asking anybody for their money or their vote. And that's why I said, no.
Well, Jonathan, first thing I want to say is that I'm not taking no from Christie. Maybe I'm taking not yet. He's newer at this business. He's got he's doing so many good things for your state, and your state needs him to keep on. And I respect completely. Although I think it'd be a great thing, but I respect completely. In my situation, quick story. I always did my own speeches and even commercials, in the campaign. I always thought, as often as possible, if I would speak for myself, and if I'd written it or figured it out myself, it would come. People would understand I meant it. And so the very last one, a year out, I knew what the last message of the second campaign would be. So I stood on a town square somewhere. I said, "Whatever your outlook on politics, I've got some really good news. This is the last time you'll have to watch me in an ad like this." And I went on and said, that we'd like to be rehired, and we had some big plans and so forth. And that was, and then ultimately was, my point of view. I had never aspired to elected office before, and I didn't aspire to it then or after. It is, as Chris said, if you finally begin to entertain what originally is just a surrealistic notion, me, then there are a lot of other factors involved. The way we conduct politics these days, pretty savage business. I could have gone with that, but this is not a decision at that level. This is not a decision you make for yourself alone. And there's 5 women in my family, and they are a formidable force. On the day I said finally I'm not doing it, I said in the Daniels Family Constitution, the Women's Caucus has a veto, and there's no override provision. So, and as we said earlier, there are other ways to contribute, and never forget the saying, I think it was de Gaulle, the cemeteries are full of indispensable men. And I just refuse to believe that, certainly that I was. But that doesn't mean you don't have an obligation if you can do a little good or have a little say, and provide a little help, and feel very obligated to do that. But in our case, in our family, that won't be as candid.
And I'd just add one other thing. I think the interesting thing to note about this going forward in terms of the requests that have been made of both me and Mitch is that we've been predominantly talking about the same things in maybe different language, but the same type of problem that we're identifying for our country's future. And so, from my perspective, if there's lots of people clamoring for us to do this, then I don't know why candidates like the president and others in our party, haven't figured out that that's why. I mean, look at the two of us. It is not our good looks up here, okay, that they're clamoring for. They're not saying there's a spot open on Mount Rushmore and, oh, man, these are the guys for it. I think it's because of our ideas. It's because of what we have chosen to emphasize as governors. So, that should, I hope, and I trusted it would have happened already, and if they did, it would get a lot of pressure off me and him, that people would understand that and start talking about it. And if they started talking about it, I think they underestimate. We talked about this when we saw each other backstage, and I think it's a good place for us to finish, is that I think that politicians on the national stage underestimate the American people in both parties. and they think that you're unwilling to hear hard truths. They think you don't recognize that our country is in crisis, and that means that everybody's going to have to sacrifice some things that they otherwise wouldn't want to sacrifice. And I think what the country is thirsting for more than anything else right now is someone of stature and credibility to look them in the eye and tell them that, and say, here's where I want us to go to deal with this crisis. And the fact that nobody yet who's running for president, in my view, has done that effectively is why you continue to hear people ask Daniels if he'll reconsider and ask me if I'll reconsider. If other people were dealing with this, I think they would just leave us be to run our states and let us do what we need to do. So part of it is, I think, our ideas, but part of it also, candidly, is the failure of the president, predominantly, since we only have one of them at a time, and then some of the other candidates on our side of the ledger from really dealing head-on with this issue and speaking in plain English to folks. And I think that's why Mitch and I have gotten along as well as we have since I joined the group, is that I watched him in Indiana and knew that a lot of things that he was doing were things that I aspired to do here. And I could point to what happened in Indiana and say, see, it can be done. It can be done. He did it. He did it with the people who supported him, with the group he put together. And so that's why when I heard he was in the neighborhood, I thought it'd be good to spend some time together. And I appreciate Ryder putting this together for us very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the dynamic duo. Thank you very much.
Oh, you were great to do that.
Please remember,